One of the most common questions I'm asked as a medical astrologer is about chronic illness, and there is a very clear reason for this. We're living in a world that asks our bodies to function in ways that they were never designed for. And the result is that chronic illness has become normalized, especially for women. In fact, it's estimated that between 60 and 75% of Americans live with one or more chronic disease. That statistic is absolutely mind-blowing. But what most people don't realize is that your birth chart often actually shows how and why your body starts breaking down before any symptoms even begin to show up. In this video, we're going to look at the top 3 patterns that I see time and time again when clients come to me suffering from chronic illness, especially conditions that are hard to pin down, difficult to diagnose, and are often very misunderstood. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune conditions, chronic Lyme disease, things like multiple chemical sensitivities or mast cell activation syndrome, and so much more. And for those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Heather Eland. I'm a professional astrologer with a master's degree in clinical psychology and a background in herbalism, mind-body therapies, and holistic health. And chronic illness is a topic I have a deep personal experience with because it really hits close to home. Way back in 2010, my health began to decline. Even though I was only in my early 20s, I felt like I was living in the body of a 90-year-old. Within just a few short years, I became so sick that on many days, it was hard to muster up the energy to even do a load of dishes, let alone show up in the world in any sort of meaningful way. Through a lot of time, dedication, persistence, and working with a team of alternative healthcare providers, along with learning how to utilize the guidance embedded in my birth chart, I was able to turn my health around and overcome chronic illness. That's why I'm so passionate about medical astrology and why I'm so excited to share this information with you today. And if you really want to dive deep into medical astrology, not just for your own health, but maybe even to work with clients and help them to overcome their own health issues as well, if you are super excited about the fact that medical astrology can help you understand how your physical condition is connected to literally everything else in your life, not just your healthcare routines, but your behaviors, your emotions, your past traumas, your relationships, your connections to this world in every single way, then Medical Astrology Mastery is for you, and it is now open for enrollment. And the best part is, if you're watching this video when it's first coming out, you can get 30% off when you join us before 11:59 p.m. Mountain Standard Time on February 11th of 2026. The link is down in the description below, and I'll talk a little bit more about Medical Astrology Mastery at the end of this video. And even if you're not ready to dive into Medical Astrology Mastery, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an important medical astrology tutorial, and definitely download the Medical Astrology 1 Quick Reference Guide. It's 100% free down in the description below to get started with just basic understanding of how health is connected to the different celestial patterns in your birth chart. Again, 100% free of charge. I just want you to be able to start learning a little bit about yourself so you can work with the energy of your health instead of struggling against it. So before we dive into my top 3 chart patterns that I see with people who are suffering from chronic illness, I do need to add a little bit of nuance because it would be irresponsible not to do so. With medical astrology, the first thing I want you guys to understand is that one specific pattern or alignment or placement in your birth chart will never ever make you sick. And also, the birth chart doesn't make you sick either. That's a whole other discussion in and of itself. When there is a correspondence between health issues and patterns in the birth chart, there are multiple patterns that connect to each individual illness. And all of those patterns have to show up in a very specific way. And your environmental influences have to contribute to developing the influence. And you have to have specific astrological triggers in the form of transits and other types of indicators like secondary progressions that will show up in this perfect storm to facilitate the illness to actually manifest. And so if you have one or more of these placements that I'm going to be talking about here, that does not mean you will ever get sick. And if you are already experiencing chronic illness and you have one or more of these patterns, you can utilize this to start understanding how to work with the energy of your chart in multiple areas of your life in order to create a better situation for yourself energetically to overcome chronic illness. And so that's really a good place to get started. The other thing that I want you guys to understand is that each specific illness in that chronic disease category has its own unique set of astrological patterns and blueprints. In medical astrology, we often refer to these as disease patterns or illness patterns. And again, these are multiple patterns that have to converge together in a very special way and be activated in a very special way for you to ever get sick. So if you have anything like that or anything that we're discussing in this video, don't freak out. Doesn't mean you're going to get sick. But the reason I'm mentioning this is that the patterns I'm discussing are very generalized, whereas if you have a specific illness like chronic fatigue syndrome, that birth chart is going to look very different in the specific patterns that will show up versus something like Hashimoto's, which has very unique signatures, versus something like chronic Lyme disease, which can occur alongside chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia and even potentially be a cause of it. But all of these things show up very differently in their own unique way, but there are certain base patterns that I've noticed that will show up across many different types of chronic illness. So that's what we're going to be discussing here today. And finally, medical astrology is not a substitute for professional healthcare advice, and this is not healthcare advice. Medical astrology does not diagnose, treat, or cure any form of illness. If you are experiencing any type of mental or physical health issue, I urge you to please seek help from a qualified medical healthcare provider. All right, so without further ado, let's get into it. And so the easiest place to begin when we're looking at patterns that are connected to potential chronic illness is going to be looking at the luminaries, the sun and the moon. Now, in medical astrology and in traditional astrology, the moon is the general significator of the body and bodily health. And so the condition of the moon is one of the primary things we're going to look at for general overall health. And for the moon specifically, women tend to be more impacted than men because the moon rules over things like our reproductive hormones and reproduction in general. And so that is going to be a bigger factor if you are born biologically female. The other thing that you want to make note of is sect. Because if you were born at night with the sun below the horizon, below the ascendant and descendant in that lower hemisphere of the birth chart, then the moon is going to play typically a more significant role in your health versus the sun. Now, the sun indicates your general vitality. It's your life force energy, your chi, your resiliency, your ability to bounce back from things. And so the sun is also hugely important. But the sun is going to be a bigger influence if you were born during the day. And so those are things that you want to also consider. But both the sun and moon can play a role when it comes to just setting the stage for you to have a little bit more of an issue with your overall resiliency, with your overall ability to heal and recover. And the moon is going to have an important role with your overall health and well-being as well. Now, things you want to look for with the sun and moon are the sun and moon in their fall or their detriment. And so the sun is in its detriment when it's in the sign of Aquarius, and it's in its fall when it's in the sign of Libra, while the moon is in its detriment in the sign of Capricorn, and it's in its fall in the sign of Scorpio. All of these placements will weaken the energy of the sun and moon, which can weaken your overall health and your overall vitality, which can set up a situation, if it's combined with all of these other patterns that we're talking about, that can make you more prone to developing a chronic condition if the environment is right for it. Another thing I see very commonly with people with chronic conditions is the sun or the moon in a conjunction with one of the lunar nodes, but especially if it's in a conjunction with the south node. The south node in medical astrology weakens the planets that it touches. It brings confusion, it brings leakiness. It really sucks and saps your vitality and life force energy. And so, especially if you have the South Node with the Sun, that can indicate having a little bit of a weakness when it comes to your overall energy, when it comes to your overall vitality, when it comes to your overall resiliency. The South Node with the Moon, again, can also weaken the physical body. And so, I do see this pretty commonly. And when you have the Moon involved, there's often also going to be an emotional component to the physiological illness, and your emotions and taking care of your emotional and mental health is going to be extra important when it comes to taking care of your physical health and the ramifications of those emotional issues on your physical health. Another thing you'll often see is the Sun or the Moon with Saturn. Saturn is chronic. Saturn is things that are difficult, that bring challenge, that bring delays, that take a long time to work on and work through. And so Saturn with the Sun, especially because Saturn is so dry and cold and the Sun is so hot and invigorating and fiery, it can really dampen your fire. It can really deplete your vitality. It can make it feel like you're lacking in energy, and it can make it harder for your body to overcome and recover from things. Saturn with the Moon can also indicate chronic issues that are hard to overcome that last, a long time or for your lifetime around overall bodily health. And so we want to look at Saturn and the Moon as an important factor as well. This will be especially important in certain types of chronic illnesses, but again, it's one of those kind of general catch-all indicators that can be a starting point for looking at the chart and assessing it if you are somebody who's experiencing chronic illness. As a special separate note, I've noticed that people with fibromyalgia, not always, but will often have the Moon in a fire sign or the Moon with Mars. And I stumbled across this kind of on accident when I was doing research and comparing charts of people with fibromyalgia so I could understand the condition better. One of the things that it made me realize is that fibromyalgia might have something to do with myelination because the Moon literally rules over myelination in medical astrology. And we have this inflammation or this like fiery energy impacting the Moon, not all the time, but enough where it was a pattern that stuck out to me. And so I went onto PubMed and did some research, and I found out that there actually is some new research showing that fibromyalgia might be caused by a myelination issue in the peripheral nervous system, not the central nervous system, but the peripheral nervous system. And so I wouldn't have known that if it weren't for the fact that I saw that in the Moon and I went looking for something to do with myelination. And so that's just one of many examples of how medical astrology can kind of point you in a different direction or in the right direction when it comes to the very physical side of certain health issues. Now, moving on to the second pattern I want to discuss, which is Saturn in an inconjunction or a quincunx aspect. Now, this specific indicator is something that I actually got from one of my medical astrology teachers, Lynn Coiner, when I was taking her medical astrology courses, and it really stuck out to me, I think partially because I have this pattern in my own birth chart and it's hitting my Moon, but also because I kept seeing it over and over again in the charts of clients that were dealing with chronic illness way before I was even doing medical astrology readings. Now, the Saturn in conjunction is especially important because there is a unique psychological and behavioral signature with this in conjunction that is relevant to the development of chronic illness. It shows that there's something connected here. And so Saturn in conjunctions show that a person tends to take on too much responsibility for other people's stuff. In conjunctions in general are an energy of either overdoing something or underdoing it or vacillating between the two. I have a whole video about in conjunction or quincunx aspects somewhere else on my channel that you guys can watch after this if you're interested. But the Saturn in conjunction has this specific pattern of burdening yourself with everybody else's stuff. Typically, with a Saturn in conjunction, you either had to grow up really quickly and take on a lot at an early age, or you yourself were made to feel like a burden because your parents sacrificed a lot to give you a good life or to even just have or raise children, or, for whatever other reason, you felt like you were a burden to your family or to your parents in some way. They made it known that it was very difficult to, pay for you or to raise you or whatever it is. And so in adulthood, there's often this pattern of taking on way too much responsibility for everybody else's stuff. Because if you are carrying all of these burdens for everyone else, how can you yourself be a burden? Right? And so it's like this overcompensation. And eventually, your body just says no. It says, no, you are doing way too much for way too many people. You are not taking care of yourself. You're neglecting your own responsibilities for your health, for your own well-being, because you are spending all of this energy carrying all of this weight, and it's not actually yours to carry. And so there is definitely this connection there. And so that's something to make note of. So one of the big things with Saturn in conjunctions that can be very helpful if you are somebody who's dealing with chronic illness is to have better boundaries with what you say yes to and the responsibilities that you take on. You come first. Your health, your well-being, your life needs to be all squared away and your ducks in a row before you take on all of this responsibility for everyone else. And when you are somebody who's suffering from chronic illness, you know that it can become impossible to carry all of that weight, and it forces you to have to rely on the help of other people. So you have to face that psychological pattern, that issue that you have with feeling like a burden, because all of a sudden you have to be a burden on other people. You're not a burden. That's not the case, but it's triggering that in you. And so there's definitely a lesson in the Saturn in conjunction that comes up for some people, not everyone. Lots of people have Saturn in conjunctions. They never have a chronic illness. But when it's combined with many other patterns and situations in the chart, this is how it shows up. And it's so common across all of these different chronic conditions, especially the ones that are more mysterious and sort of invisible and misunderstood, that it really is worth making note of. The third and final pattern that I want to discuss with you today is the one that is really the most challenging and most problematic that I have seen with chronic illness. And it's another one that shows up just time and time again. And it's also another one that I happen to have in my chart too. So I have lots of experience with this. And again, that goes to show you that just because you have these patterns, and even if you do fall ill, it doesn't mean that you're going to stay that way. You might have to work a little bit harder for the rest of your life to keep yourself in this state of vitality than the average person might, but you can get there. You can absolutely get there. And so this Mars-Neptune energy is very problematic because Mars rules so many things that are important to our health, our motivation, our well-being. Mars rules our adrenals and our cortisol and adrenal hormones. It's connected to the sympathetic nervous system. It's connected to our immune system. It's literally the body's defense mechanism. And when Neptune is aligned with Mars, especially in a conjunction, opposition, or square, there can be a lot of confusion and dysfunction of the immune system. You'll see this pattern very commonly in people who have weakened immune systems, who have immune system dysfunction, who have autoimmune conditions, who have allergies, who have histamine intolerance and histamine issues because Mars rules histamine, people who have chronic fatigue syndrome and who deal with adrenal fatigue and adrenal issues, people who deal with sympathetic nervous system issues in general, which is a huge factor across all chronic illness, in my opinion and in my understanding. And so this is huge. Understanding the fact that Neptune is causing this sort of dissolving of the structures of these bodily areas and functions is a big factor, because you have to understand that your immune system is a little bit more temperamental. It's a little bit more sensitive. You're going to be more prone maybe to pathogens and to allergies and to autoimmune conditions than other people. And so you want to make sure that you're being careful about what you're putting into your body and what you're exposing yourself to, not just physically, but also energetically. Because again, this is your adrenals. This is your sympathetic nervous system. The way that your body responds to stress might feel like it's all over the place. Sometimes you can handle a lot, sometimes you can't. This is also one that's very common with chronic fatigue syndrome because it's associated with exercise intolerance or post-exertion malaise, which is what it's called now, I've learned. And that's something that I've dealt with that I'm still working on and working through and building resiliency around today, because that Mars energy rules our ability to physically take action, to physically be active. It rules our muscles. And again, it rules the sympathetic nervous system. And so what this shows is the body responding to normal physical exertion as if it's some sort of threat. Your body's confused about it, and it's activating this sympathetic nervous system response that does not necessarily need to be activated just because you went for a jog or you took a Pilates class. And so again, these things are just so common with people who have chronic illness. Not all of the time, and not everyone will have this pattern, but it's in there. And when you look at the psychological connections, the deeper connections to other areas of your life, Mars rules your motivation and your ability to take action. There can be a lot of ambivalence around taking new action, around your goals, around your ambitions. There can also be anger issues because Mars is our ability to experience and express anger. And one of the things that you'll find with Mars-Neptune people is that anger was expressed in a way that was very confusing in early childhood, where it was either overexpressed or underexpressed or expressed inappropriately or misdirected toward the person who now has the chronic illness. That's very common. And so it throws your sympathetic nervous system really off kilter. It throws off your fight or flight response. And so that is another thing that you'll see with that Mars-Neptune energy. The final thing that I'll say, and I learned this one from Lynn Coiner as well, is that Mars and Neptune, when they're together, tend to bring alcoholism and issues with addiction, but especially alcohol dependency in the family lineage. And what I've noticed with my clients is that often they won't have alcohol abuse or alcohol issues themselves, because they've already learned that they don't handle alcohol well. And they've already learned potentially through seeing and experiencing what alcohol has done to different members of their family that they should stay away from it. But sometimes they might not get that lesson. Sometimes they might not get that message if there are other indicators in the birth chart and they themselves might develop an issue with alcohol. So that is kind of a side note, but it is an interesting factor. And I often wonder if kind of healing through that family connection to alcohol dependence, alcohol abuse, alcoholism is part of the path of these people, and if it's somehow energetically at least linked to the chronic illness pattern. So just something to ponder and to mull over. Okay, so I said I was going to give you 3, but I also want to give you just a bonus thing to look at in the birth chart when it comes to chronic illness, because the modalities of cardinal, fixed, and mutable in medical astrology all show very specific things. So for example, cardinal energy, when it comes to a pattern that's connected to an illness, can often show something that's going to be more acute. Mutable energy can show things that are going to vacillate and get better and get worse and sort of go all over the place over time. Whereas fixed sign energy, when it's connected to a specific pattern that you have in your chart that you know is part of a bigger configuration connected to an illness, can indicate something that is long lasting or that even sometimes lasts a lifetime. And so when you're looking for things that are chronic in the birth chart, fixed sign energy, difficult fixed sign energy, I should say, can be a factor. Not always the case, though. Fixed sign energy could just indicate that those particular body areas that are ruled by the fixed signs, like the cardiovascular system, for example, are going to be, more problematic or something that you need to really focus on supporting, right? It might not be that there's something chronic going on or that there's something chronic there. But again, it's another thing to look at as part of an overall pattern when it comes to chronic illness. All right, so those are my top 3 patterns that I've personally seen as a medical astrologer, working with clients, teaching students, doing tons of chart research on all sorts of different illnesses. If you find this fascinating, if you're an astrologer who wants to dive deep into medical astrology in a coherent, structured system that builds your knowledge from the ground up and takes you all the way from understanding the basic connections and significations to weaving these patterns together to give general wellness guidance to your clients, and to even understand how the astrology connects to very specific illnesses and symptoms and diseases, medical astrology mastery is for you. Again, you can find the link down in the description below. This course is not just going to take you through everything you need to know, but we are going to help guide you there. And so that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like it, subscribe to my channel, comment below and let me know if any of this resonated with you or helped you in some way, and share this with a friend who is also interested in learning medical astrology. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.